Good morning, Shavua Tov, Boker Tov. May we have a better Shavua and a better morning than the news that we had this morning. Our hero for today is Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, uh, very important leader, rabbi, rav, educator. He was born in Europe, but he claimed to fame. His claim to fame was obviously in his work in the United States and specifically in Torah Vodaas. I apologize for pronouncing it as Torah Vodaas. I'm sure that he himself would not have recognized that in this pronunciation, but I have to, I'm speaking how I speak. So Torah Vodaas. But I would say Torah Vodaas from now on. Heading this yeshiva, high school yeshiva, basically he was very prominent, very important in creating the Haredi world in the United States of today. Is very well known, and also he have a few sons that are still alive, many of them, but one of them that passed away only a few years ago, his name was Rav Natan Kamenetsky. And this Rav Natan Kamenetsky had a bent towards history. I don't think that he had any formal education as a historian, but he had a bent towards history, and he was very interested in anything that had to do with his father. So he collected a lot of materials. The biography of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky is one of the first biographies that was published by ArtScroll. And that was all based on the material collected by his son. And there was some author that wrote it, a guy named Jonathan Rosenblum. But the material was collected by the son. That was published, I think, a few years after the passing of our hero, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, in 86. And then it was also translated and published to Hebrew. So I read the Hebrew edition, didn't read the English edition, I read the Hebrew edition. However, Rab Natan Kamenetsky thought that even what ArtScroll put out was not enough. And he was planning on publishing a whole series about his father, but he was interested not only in the biography of his father, but also on the context, the broad context of the Lithuanian war in Europe and the other Gdolei Torah in Europe and in the United States. However, as I said, he had some bent towards history, so he wrote everything. Everything means things that have positive reflections on the subject matter, and also some stories that maybe have some negative reflections. As you can imagine, he published the first book in the series that he was planning to write. Hundreds of pages. I think it was 2 volumes with something like 1,000 pages between them, and there was a whole uproar. It was published in English. There was a whole uproar. It called it "making of a gadol," meaning you can understand the creation. How to create a giant, a Torah giant. However, as I said, he told things as he heard them, as he believed they were, as he heard from other witnesses, and he didn't write only the nice and good things. And that was some of the people. So as long as it was only in the biographies about his father, then it was his own problem. But when he began to publish this type of stories also about other Rabbanim and important people, so their children and their students were very unpleased with this book, to the extent that they were able to achieve that Rabbi Yashiv here in Eretz Israel would publish a ban against the Sefer. Now, Rav Natan Kamenetsky was, and to his passing, he was a Haredi, and he never thought to put himself outside of the camp. He was publishing the books in order to educate about the world of yesterday. And so he tried to publish a second edition that would be censored, basically, corrected, adapted, you can call it whatever, improved, abridged. However, it didn't work. The second edition was banned as well. Now, Rav Elyashiv would the first one to admit that he cannot read English. So Rav Elyashiv put a committee of 3 Rabbanim that hopefully are able to read English in order to judge the book. It's a long story. It's not our topic for today. But as I said, the bottom line was that the book was banned. And to this day, in the National Library in Eretz Israel, בספרייה הלאומית, they have a special room for rare books because Rav Natan himself destroyed the copies because it was banned by Rabbi Elyashiv, by the Gedolim. So the ספרייה הלאומית was able to get one of the rare copies that survived, and they have it in their special rare books category. So if you want to read the book, you can go to National Library and see it there. So what I mean to say is because of all of this material that the Sun collected, there is a whole mountain of materials about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. And I would have to immediately admit that I didn't read, I don't think even 10% of the material that there is. As I said, I read major parts of the biography in Hebrew. I read a few more online information that I was able to acquire. I learned a few of his chidushim to get the spirit of the way that he learned, and I'm trying to portray it to you as good as a picture as I can. If someone can portray a better picture and is willing to come here and give a shiur, I would immediately surrender my place. Okay, so all of that in the way of introduction, and now Baruch Hashem, we begin. Yaakov Kamenetsky, young Yaakov Kamenetsky, was born in 1891. 1891. That is 130 years ago, give or take. And he was born in a place named Kalishkova. This Kalishkova, it was in what was back then was called by the Jews Lithuania. Nowadays it's Belarus. And it was a village. It was not a village. It was a achuza. How do you say achuza? It was a state that belonged to the family of his mother. He came from a very rich family. Not great lamdanim, I mean, they were observant. Not great Torah scholars, but great, meaning very, very rich. However, when he was still infant, they lost all of the money because of a combination of some of the decrees by the Tsar and some mistakes. Excuse me?
כתוב שאנחנו עוד מעט מקבלים... We're getting an alert.
To here, for Talmud?
An advance warning.
Givat Ze'ev is very far from here. But
yeah, but my kids are...
Yeah. Okay, so we would sit and learn. There is a mamad here, so you can continue.
Our kids are there.
Okay. You know what, we can speak about the history, but it seems that history is breaking into the shiur. So his family lost most of their property, and they had to sell this estate and move to the near city, which was called Dolinov, or the Russian called it Dolchinov. You know, that's the way that the Russians pronounce. Again, as I said, nowadays Belarus. Rabbi Yaakov, years later, he would say that the best thing that ever happened to him was that his family lost their money. He said, otherwise, I would be part of the family business, and I would almost certainly not even leave Europe, and in the Second World War, I would have been stuck in Belarus, and would happen to me what happened to most of the Jews there in Lithuania. And even if, let's say, that I would have survived, I would have never had reached the Torah knowledge and the position of Torah teaching that I had acquired. So losing all of this money in the end was the best thing, at least for him. So that's an interesting way to look at it. Now, at Dolinov, he was sent to the local cheder, of course, to be taught to write, to read some Torah. And he remembered one story, which I think, I wouldn't say it shaped his life, but he used it many times later. And that is so again, he was a young child, 5, 6, in the cheder. And it seems, I didn't even know that, it seems that the Christians had in their Pascha, they have like a Lag BaOmer thing, in which they have fires. Anyone ever heard about it? I never heard about it. Maybe it's only the Orthodox, the Greek, or I don't know, how it's called, the Russian Orthodox. Yeah, maybe only they have this minhag. However, so they have a Lag BaOmer Medura during their Pascha. And the Melamed told the children they are not allowed to go. I guess that the children they wanted to go and see the fires. So the Melamed, the Rebbe told them that they are not allowed to go. And fine. Next morning, young Yaakov, for some reason, just fell asleep and he slept late. Never happened to our children, but maybe happened to other children. And they slept late. He slept late, and he came late to the cheder. So the Melamed told him, "I'm sure that the reason why you are late and you slept late is because yesterday night you went to see the fire." And young Yaakov told him, "No, I didn't." The Rebbe didn't believe him, and he hit him on his hand with a sargel or with a ruler, as was back then the custom. And
Not the custom now.
it was we don't tell it anymore. So Rabbi Yaakov said, and he repeated it many times later, that he learned two.
אתם בדיוק במפלט שלנו. תיקח את השיעור פה, איזה ממוצע זה?
היה בשבוע שעבר, כן?
חזר שבאתם זה נגמר באלף. Until then, we're young. We can.
No, okay, okay.
גם פה לסגור אותה.
אבל יש שם מלא ג'וקים, פנינה, אתה רוצה לפתוח.
כאילו זה...
אז זה, תשמעי, יש סיכוי קטן מאוד שמשהו ייפול בדיוק על ה... לא, מעניין, זה סגר לי את המצלמה, המעבר.
יש לי הצעה, תעבור רגע טיפה, בואו, כי תקשיב לגדולים, מקום לשבת, בואו. אבל זה בשקט, בשקט?
מצלמה מתה.
So we didn't want to tell us.
I think,
Yeah.
firstly, I think this is a miracle. Perhaps we take it for granted. We
Yeah.
hear an alarm and we just feel relaxed yesterday
Right.
morning and staying with people I didn't know. But
Okay, so we continue. So back to the story of young Yaakov and the ruler. So he said he learned two main lessons from the story. One is that a teacher should never punish a student unless he's completely certain that there is a reason for. Because in that case, the Rebbe didn't really know, and he punished for no reason. The second is that the teacher must have a good knowledge of the character of his students. He should know them. Why? Because if Rabbi Yaakov said, if you would have known me, I would never have lied. There are children that do not lie. And if you would have known that, you wouldn't have striken me. And of course, the problem was not with the strike with on the hand. It was with the shame, right? And the pain that he felt in his heart. So that these were the two lessons. Many years later, when Yaakov would be a young teacher in a place named Tiktin in Europe, and he didn't hit the children. the parents were so troubled by that, they went to the local Rav and told him that we have a problem with the new teacher. It does not hit our children. And Chosech Shivto Soneh Bno, that's not an education if you do not hit the child from time to time. And the Rav had a whole discussion with the new teacher, the new young teacher, and he told the parents later, he told them, in your homes, do you have a picture of the Chafetz Chaim? And the parents told that was the minhag back then. Every house would have a picture of the Chafetz Chaim. Not every, but many houses in the Lita would have the picture of the Chafetz Chaim or of Chaim Oizer on in their home. And the Rav told them one day it would be the picture of this young teacher hanged on the wall. So you should follow whatever he says about chinuch. News.
Yes, Samantha said in Lodge, Boom Shalachayim.
Where?
In Lodge.
Okay, I hope it's in the skies. That it hit in the Notman?
No, I think it hit, but like the boom was.
The boom was okay. Okay, so 1902. 1902, he's 11 years old. He's being sent to Minsk. He's already had out-leveled all of the teachers in Dolinov, which I don't think was a great center of Torah. So he's being sent to Minsk, which was a great center of Torah, in order to learn there. So a child, 11 years old, already being sent away. That's not a simple matter. Now, when he met, there's a beautiful story. When he met the head of the cheder in Minsk, so the head there, the Rebbe there asked him, he said, "Aren't you too young to come to a yeshiva?" And young Yaakov told him, "I came here to learn Torah, not to add to you to a minyan." So it's a great answer. So he was accepted. On the basis of this answer, he was accepted. And there he met also two friends that would accompany him for the rest of his life. One is Reuven, it was called back then Reuven Minsker, but would be known as Reuven Grodozhonsky. And the second is Aaron, that was then known as an orphan. He was known as Aaron Sislovitzer or Pines, but he would be later be famous as Aaron Kotler. Now, these three would more or less establish the Haredi Chinuch world in the United States. So these are three very important names, at least for Aaron Kotler, I hope to speak about Im Yirtzeh Hashem in a future shiur. So when he was learning in Minsk, he learned Torah. He also learned history from books that he was able to find. He was also very interesting in science. Now, all of that was not in any regular or systematic way. He learned it as an autodidact. So he read a book here, a book there, whatever he was able to find, obviously in Russian. It was the language of the science in these places. So he learned these books in Russian. And he used this knowledge later. It's very interesting. He had, as we'll see later, he was a very practical man. He was very clever, but a realist and a very practical man. I think it had to do, I mean, obviously now I'm being a 2-cent shrink, as they say, but I think it has to do with him growing up in a family that was not a family of Rabbanim. So it was not a family where their heads was up in the clouds. These were very down-to-earth people that he was born and where he was raised. So he was, in the end, he was very clever, very smart. He had an excellent memory to a very old age. But he was a very down-to-earth man. And so also his pursuit for knowledge and wisdom was in a way in an earthly manner, in the sense that he was also very interested just in real science. Now again, he didn't get any Mesudar education in this field, so don't expect it. We spoke about Rabbi Dr. Herzog. It's a different animal. He didn't learn in university. He didn't learn in a high school. He didn't learn in a common school in the sense that we would speak about today. But he had an interest. And he was open. he also became an expert in checkmate, in shachmat. That's very interesting. Now, in Lithuanian yeshivot, I read somewhere that some rabbanim saw it as an illness, as some would relate today to smartphones. So they addicted to checkmate, and they would play and into the night. But years later, he would use that as part of his education efforts. So when he would want to become a friend of a student that maybe in Torah right now he is not able to speak with him because the student is not in a level yet to speak with on a high level on Torah, he would play chess against him, chess. And by that you would create a relationship with him. So a good educator is able to utilize every ability that he has for the goal of education, which again I think is a very good story, a very good representation of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. So he learned there for 4 years in this small yeshiva in Minsk, and then in 1906, so he's just after his bar mitzvah, he's a big boy. Now he can go to a real yeshiva. He goes off to Slabodka. Slabodka was a big yeshiva, hundreds of students, 300, 400 students. It was a Musar yeshiva. It was headed by the legendary Slabodka Alter. We call it, in Hebrew, we call him the Saba of Slabodka, but Alter means the older in English, in Yiddish, excuse me. So his name was Rab Natan Tzvi Finkel. This Slabodka yeshiva would later make Aliyah to Eretz Israel and would become known as Hebron. So that's the story of the Slabodka Yeshiva. He would not make the Aliyah with Slabodka, but that's the big yeshiva of Slabodka. As I said, it was a Musar yeshiva, and the specific color, we may say, of the Musar of Slabodka was teaching to achieve greatness. גדולת האדם. Do you prefer to go back outside or be more air? הנה בואי נעשה הפוך, אנחנו נצא החוצה והם יישארו בפנים.
Yeah, it's warm in here anyway.
אתם יכולים לעלות לשולחן, נראה לכם מה.
אני חושב שיותר נעים כאן. זה גמר את כל הריכוז בשיעור, המעבר הזה. כן.
אם אתה קורא באנגלית, הדיבור יבוא אחר כך.
הלוואי, עוד מעט יש לי בגרות.
מדבר פה עם החבר'ה, יש פה הרבה אנשים צעירים שמדברים רק אנגלית.
Okay. We continue. It's just to make some, to gather us back again. So we speak about Yaakov Kamenetsky. We speak about Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was born in 1891, and now is coming to Slabodka in 1906, learning under Reb Natan Tzvi Finkel, the Slabodka Alter, the Saba Mislavodka, and there they are being taught about the greatness of man. The greatness of man doesn't mean that a man is born great. It means that a man can reach greatness. That is the meaning of the greatness of man. Gadlut Adam. That's the motto. That's the slogan that they use. Gadlut Adam, the greatness of man. Now, in what ways the greatness of man express itself? Excuse me. In basically and mostly in the ability of the mind to govern the body and the emotions. Self-control to the last end. That's what they teach you in Slabodka. So in contrast to other Musar yeshivot, they would not require you to dress in strange ways. They would not, almost everything was internal. Externally, they were just being required to dress in a mechubad fashion, in a respectful fashion, again, in order to reflect that a human being must be, and especially a Torah learner, a Ben Torah, must be someone to be respected. I'll just close the door.
Looking card again about what you're talking about. Born in 18.
Sometimes you just have to fight against the Satan. Okay. Now, it was very important there in Slabodka to educate Bachurim, young boys, young men, that would have independence. It's very interesting. So it's a yeshiva that does not want you to become a chassid, a follower of the Rosh Yeshiva. It is a yeshiva that tries to to take out of you who you are authentically. The way that God created you. That's the way they educate. It's very interesting, for example, in the beginning, the Saba, the Rav Natan Tzvi Finkel, the founder of the yeshiva, brought Rosh Yeshiva to give Gemara shiurim. Rabbi Yaakov who was an excellent Talmid Chacham and also a very charismatic personality. But after a few years, he felt, meaning the Saba felt, that Rabbi Yitzhak has such a strong personality that he doesn't let the students to develop their own sense of Torah learning. They just follow his path. So he departed from Rabbi Yitzhak and he brought other Rosh Yeshiva, which also was a Gadol Batorah and could teach Torah, but just was not so eloquent and was not so lucid. So in a sense, it created more space for the students to create their own way in Torah learning. He wanted that most of the learning would be done in the sdarim, meaning in their own self-learning. And the shiurim, the lessons were very short in order, again, to move the responsibility to the shoulders of the students. It's not up to Rosh Yeshiva to prepare the shiur and give it to you, and you just sit and listen. It's up to you to create yourself as Torah learners. That was the message of the yeshiva. As you can imagine, with some of the students, it went very, very good. Others sometimes would get lost in such a free environment. So it's a very complicated process. But it was very, very good for the young Yaakov Kamenetsky. Again, another interesting story which reflects on the character of Rabbi Yaakov was that one day they brought a new chavruta to learn with him. His name was Rabbi David Leibovich. He would be an extremely important rabbi after that in the future. And this Rav David Leibovich sat down with him and they were learning Masechet Gittin. And in Masechet Gittin there is a discussion about Gittin that come from Chutz La'aretz, from outside of Eretz Israel. There are certain halachot that relates to Gittin that come from outside of Eretz Israel. And the Mishnah gives you the places where the boundary is, where we see what we see as Chutz La'aretz, what we see as Eretz Israel. And there is a Mishnah and Gemara, and the Rishonim discuss. And Yaakov Kamenetsky bought a map of Eretz Israel, and he was sitting with the map, and he saw that one of the location doesn't fit the way that it's being described in the Mishnah and Gemara, doesn't fit the actual map. And the Chavruta, this David Leibovich, went to the Saba of Slabodka, went to the altar, and told him, I don't want to continue to learn with this guy. He is rejecting the words of Chazal based on some maps. I'm not interested in maps, I'm interested in the words of Chazal. And the Saba had to speak with him in order to calm him down, that it's fine that young Rabbi Yaakov wants also to look at the maps. But you see from here the bent of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, as I said, to history, to real... Now again, scientifically speaking, just buying a map in a store is not scientific. That's like going to Wikipedia. Obviously, if you really want to be scientific, you need to check different maps. He would have to go to the Russian library or wherever he was able to go back then and to check the different maps from the time of the Mishnah and from the time of the Talmud and compare them. that was much beyond the scope of his ability, not only his physical ability as a yeshiva student, but we have to admit also beyond his scope as someone that grew up only in traditional upbringing. But he had this innate sense, almost scientific sense, in which he was trying to check things as he understood the best. And Reb Natan Tzvi Finkel was open enough, as I said, because he wanted to encourage this independence. So Reb Natan Tzvi Finkel was open enough in order not to shut him down, but instead to encourage him and to prod him and to push him, yeah, continue in this way and see where you can go with it. Many years later, many years later, when the first man would land on the moon, so that's, we speak 70 years later, the first man landed on the moon, no 70, but 60 years later. 60 years later, and they came, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was already in retirement, so to speak, in his house in Monsey. And they came to him and said to him that a man is going, it was just before, a man is going to land on the moon. And Rabbi Yaakov said, no, that's impossible. That's impossible because Rambam says, in the Sefer of the Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, Rambam describes the physics as he understood them. And Rambam says that the material that the moon and the other stars are made of is different than the material here. It's more spiritual material. It's something that you cannot step on. And they told him, no, it's going to happen. And they invited him to, so the man that spoke to him invited him to come to his place. He had a TV. Rabbi Yaakov didn't have a TV at home, but he invited him to come and see, because they said that it would be televised. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky came to this guy to see on television how a man lands on the moon. And he saw. After he saw, he was convinced. He said, I sat for a few days and scratched my head. How can Rambam be, how can we be metaretz? How can we reconcile the Rambam with what I just saw? And he came to the conclusion that Rambam based himself upon the scientific knowledge that was available in his day, and it's not Rambam that was wrong, it's the scientists that were wrong. Rambam, and of course, and he's right, completely right, that Rambam didn't, he was not a physicist. He was a physician, but not a physicist. And what he learned about the stars, he learned from Aristotle. And that's right, Aristotle was wrong about the material of the moon and the sun, etc. And Rabbi Yaakov thought it's such a chidush that in 1980 there was a convention of Aguda here in Eretz Israel, and he was 90. They flew him in, and in his speech, what he decided to speak about was this Rambam and the terutz he had. And some of the Rabbanim were so shocked. And he was a giant of Torah. He was someone that they all looked up to, were so shocked from what he had to say. And that's, they say that the children of the Rav of Bris, the Gris, that his children said that it is better, they said it in Yiddish. It sounds better in Yiddish, of course. But they said, you do not die from a question. So okay, you had a question on the Rambam. You don't have to die, because you don't have to say that that Rambam was wrong. We can just think about it a little longer. That's how they related to it. But again, you see the way that he was interested in these things and that he was open. There are others. A chidush of him. Again, he was, for example, he saw that when the Rambam quotes a certain pasuk, לא תלכו בחוקות הגויים. So Rambam writes in his Mishnah Torah, I think his version is Hagoyim. In our Sifrei Torah it says Hagoy. And Rambam repeats it 3 times in his Mishnah Torah, in Sefer HaMitzvot. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky checked and saw that in the Sefer Torah of the Shomronim, also the version, the Girsa, the Nusach, is Goyim. And he said maybe the Rambam made a different version in his Sefer Torah. He suggested it again to one of the Gdolei Torah of the earlier generation, and he said it himself that the gown, the genius that he suggested it to it became as white as a wall. when he suggested that. But Rabbi Yaakov was open to these thoughts. He said, if you have to follow truth, wherever it leads you. And that was one thing that he learned in Slabodka, but obviously it was a trait of his personality. To his books he called Emet LeYaakov, truth to Yaakov. That's because of the centrality of truth in his life. I would return to these traits and to these features that he learned in Slabodka, Bezrat Hashem, as we'd continue the shiur. During the First World War, 1914 to 1918, he had to run away, as all the Jews in Eastern Europe. Everyone was on the move, and he's running. They tried to recruit him to the Russian army. He's not interested, as you can imagine. So he's running away, learning in different yeshivot. In the end, he finished in Tiktin. There he became a teacher. We already told the story of him not hitting the boys. And in the end of the war, he comes to Lumzhe, the city that we already spoke about, a big Jewish city with a great yeshiva. And he comes to there, he's very, very weak and tired. And he comes to the yeshiva in Lumzhe. Lomzha, that's the right. Lomzha. He comes to the yeshiva, and he comes to the Rosh Yeshiva was only 9 years older than he. He comes to the Rosh Yeshiva for a faher, for a test, to be accepted. And the Rosh Yeshiva asks him a question, and he thinks for a moment he sits on the sofa, and he falls asleep in the middle of the test. So the Rosh Yeshiva was sure that there's another one of the guys just coming to have a free meal, and tomorrow he would go away. So he left him to sleep on the sofa, and the Rosh Yeshiva himself excused himself out of the room. And when Rabbi Yaakov woke up, he understood that he had missed the boat, and okay, so he also went away. Only the next morning, this was the name of the Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Mordechai, I think. Rabbi Mordechai learned he was already very well known after being in Slabodka for so many years. So he was already known, and he learned who was the guy that he missed. So he accepted, that's what Reb Natan, the son, tells in the Sefer, that Rabbi Mordechai make a vow that he would never again reject a student from his yeshiva. And he went to the street to look for Rabbi Yaakov. He found Rabbi Yaakov, and he accepted him to his yeshiva. In 1919, after the Second World War, in the old age, but because of the war, the First World War, everything was delayed. So in 1919, he was married to Ita Hetel Heller, who was the daughter of the Mashgiach in Slabodka. So that's okay. He was well respected in Slabodka. And you get, yes, exactly. And as was the minhag back then, he was just offered, he was told that she was the daughter of the Mashgiach, so immediately he said, yes, just I want to meet her one time. How would the meeting go? It's not that they both would sit and speak. The way the meeting would go, he would come to the Mashgiach to speak in Divrei Torah, and the daughter would offer tea. And he would accept, and he would drink the tea, and he would also be able, when she would bring the tea and take it back, he would be able to see her, she would be able to see him, and that should be enough to make the decision. And for a lifetime, and he made his own for a lifetime. Unfortunately, she died young. But they were very happy in their marriage. However, later when being in the United States, he would tell his students, this method was right in Europe because the daughters would not go to a school. So she would be educated only at her home. So if you knew the parents, you knew the girl. But nowadays, he told them that they are going out of home and they are being affected by what is outside of home to the best or to the worst. Then you need to meet with the girl herself to know if you want to marry her and she to know if she wants to marry you. So he made his distinction to his students, I think, again, very interesting and very practical. He didn't say, that's what we did back then, that's what we should do now. He understood that times have shifted and things have changed. Time is, okay. Then he studies in the Koilel of Slabodka. Again, he continues in Slabodka. He saw himself and he would call himself later as the last of the Mohicans, the last of the Slabodkaians. And I mean, he was not impressed with the attempts to continue the Musar movement after World War II. He thought that there would be never such Musar persons as he met in Europe. So he said the Musar ended in World War II. Excuse me, in World War II, because some have survived. But in World War II, he said that was the end of the Musar movement. And I am only a student, I'm not a teacher of the Musar movement, and I am the last of the students, the last of the Mohicans. That's the way, and that's why also he saw it very important that he should tell many stories from Slabodka, because he is the only one, we speak about the 80s already, so he is the only one left to tell the story. In 1926, he becomes a rabbi of a very small Lithuanian city named, I would for sure now butcher the name, Chitivian. 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 A very small city, but a classical, typical, beautiful Jewish city. By the way, this Natan that I rely great, as you can see, I rely greatly upon him, but everyone that speaks about Rabbi Yaakov relies on him. And he was born in this Chitivian, and he was in love with this small city that almost, I think, virtually no one, I think only one Jew survived the Holocaust from this small city. And he was in love with this. One of the books in the series that he was planning, that unfortunately he didn't write in the end, was supposed to be dedicated to Chitivian as a representative of the Lithuanian state. That's unfortunately, as I said, we didn't merit. So there was a beautiful story that he liked to tell about his time in Chitivian, and that is that after a few weeks after he was appointed as a Rav, a Jew came to him and told him that he went to the post office in Chitivian, and he paid, and there was a change, and he got too many coins in the change. So he came to the Rav to ask him if he should return the money to the Goy. I don't want to tell you what other Rabbanim may have answered to these questions. However, Rav Kamenetsky told him, of course, you should go back and return the change. That's what the Jew did. Fine. A few weeks later, the Rav himself, Rav Yaakov himself, had to go to the post again for some. Nowadays, no one goes, maybe only to collect deliveries. But back then, the post office was very important. People would use it not only to send letters. The bank was the post. Everything would be through the post office. So he went to the post office for another arrangement. And very interesting, again, the post, the Pakid, the office, the clerk, yeah, gave him, I think there he bought stamps, and he gave him too many stamps. But he looked at the clerk, and it seemed to him that the clerk is looking at him. So maybe it was like a type of a test. And he gave him back again. He gave him the mistake, the stamps that were given by mistake. And Rabbi Yaakov was very happy, and the clerk smiled, and everything was fine. Years later, Rabbi Yaakov already was in the United States, but in the Holocaust, in the World War II, this clerk was the one that hid the only Jew that survived in the city. And Rabbi Yaakov speculated, now we have no clear evidence, but he speculated that the whole test of how the Jews would behave had a part in the clerk later saving this Jew. So that's an interesting story. And by the way, you see here how careful Natan Kamenetsky is, because I saw other versions of the story, which are obviously can only be offsprings of the version of Natan, and there they tell that the clerk told him that that's the reason why he saved the Jew, and in one version this clerk became the head of the city and rescued all of the Jews of the city. The story took a life of itself, of its own. But the way I told it now, that's the way that Natan Kamenetsky tells it, and I think that's the real version. Okay, now this was a small city, so it was still traditional even after the First World War. And we have to know, we have this ideal picture of Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. Everyone was dati, everyone, even the people that were balagulot, right, the taxi drivers. So all of them knew all Shas Baal Peh. that's not necessarily true. And especially after the First World War, there was a great decline in observant, in Jewish education, in almost everything, and there was a great poverty. There were extreme difficulties of social problems, and the situation was very bad. Just read some things that were written during this era. And people, even the leading yeshivot, had a worse rate, I would say, of people falling off the derech than our high schools, yeshivot high schools today. So in some of the leading yeshivot that people revere to this day, in Volozhin, in other places, there would be 30% that would go off the derech. 40 numbers that nowadays would close the yeshiva would say that's a complete failure. There is nothing to do here. So these were very different times. These were very different times, and even the Chitivian was, out of the road and a small place, and the winds of modernity were not so strong. However, things were beginning to fall apart, and also there was no money. They were extremely poor. He had one shirt. So when he took it to the laundry, of course, no machine. They had to go to the river. So it was a whole day for a laundry. He would go only with his, we call it the capitan, right? The jacket. So no money. He tried to take a position in a different city, which would have a better salary. However, you can see it as a lack of luck. He was just not. He didn't succeed in any of his candidates. Also, I would think that he didn't have the family connections. Again, he didn't come from a rabbinic family. And he was connected to the Saba, which was good, but that was good for yeshivot, not necessarily for rabbanim, for shteles in cities. So the short summary is he was not able to receive any position anywhere, and that was obviously the second best thing that happened to him in his life. The first was that his family lost all of its money. The second thing was that he was not. At 1937, he went to United States. Just imagine that you would get a position in 1937 in somewhere in Lithuania. His chances of survival would be next to zero. Next to zero. Almost no Rabbanim survived from Lithuania or from these years. There was no chance. If he was a simple Jew, maybe you can hide. But the Rav, they would immediately find him as they entered. Because in Lithuania, that was the Holocaust by bullets. That was not gas chambers. It was not Auschwitz. They killed them just when they came in. And they would take, the rabbi, of course, would be taken. Would be the first one to be taken. So he had no chance. So that was and again, he was devastated. He would have to go to the Treif Medina, to America. Who knows what would happen? Who knows if his children would have good Jewish education? He saved their life. That's, again, but who knows the ways of God? So he received, in the end, he went to the United States. At first, he went in order to raise funds for Slabodka. That was the official title, but it was obvious to everyone that what he's really doing is collecting money, but he's looking for a position for himself in some city. Now, it's already 10, and I didn't even begin to speak about his role as the leader of the United States. I think that would have to be, I guess, postponed to next week. However, just a few more stories. So he went in as a money raiser, as a fundraiser. He began to collect, and he come to a certain rich person, and he tells him, according to what I have here, you gave last year X amount, so please give the same amount. And this rich guy says to him, I respect you and I respect the yeshiva, and they want to donate, but you should know that the number you have there, that's a lie. You should reduce 10. I gave 10th of them what you, and I would give you the same amount that I gave last year, but please don't try to cheat me. And Rabbi Yaakov said, I would have never. Now he was a man of emet. I would have never. He said, I've never have cheated to you, and I don't know what you speak about. And the rich man goes and he is keeping all of the checks, and he shows him the copy of the check from, and that is correct. The number was 1/10 of what the office gave Rabbi Yaakov. And Rabbi Yaakov understood that in the office they are uptouching the numbers in order to touching in order to raise, in order to encourage people to donate more. And Rabbi Yaakov said, I would not take even 1 cent from you. And the guy asked him, why? No, I would give you the same amount I gave last year. He said, no, because I am not collecting for the office anymore. I just quit. And so he tried to convince him, maybe take just the money there for your ride, for your effort. No, I would not take anything because the whole thing was a sham, and I am not participating in these type of things. And although all of his respect to Slabodka and everything, in the second he understood that he's being utilized, he is used for a monkey business, he was out of the game. He was out of the game. However, now he's stuck in America without a penny, and there is no social security, especially not for someone that just came from Europe, but for no one back then. You could die in the street. So he's in a real problem. He's beginning to travel around. Some of his friends from Slabodka already made the move to the United States, so he's able to find some people that would host him, and he's looking for a position. Don't worry, I'm ending. I'll finish in a minute. The first place he found a position in was in Seattle, Washington. Yeah, in a kehila named Bikur Cholim. Now, I don't know. I didn't check. I wonder about this name. Why Kehila would call itself Kehilat Bikur Cholim? Were they running a hospital? I don't. Shomrei Shabbat I can understand. Lomdei Torah I can understand. Why would the Kehila call itself Bikur Cholim?
Different kehilot got together.
And one was called Bikur and the other Cholim. Not.
That narrative was
A funny name. Yeah.
just about
Two names.
two names.
Maybe I don't know, but it's a Chevre Kadisha they were called. So that's a side note. So he became the rabbi there. But the Kehillah there was not in a great shape, and I think there was no good connection between him and them. So in less than a year, he moved to Toronto, Canada, in Kehillah Torah Emet, where he served for 7 years in Kehillah Torah Emet. Now, the first question they asked him, they were Polish Jews, the Kehillah that he was received into. So they asked him if he's a Chassid or a Mitnaged. So he said, I am a Chassid, but my problem is that the Rebbe that I am a Chassid of is a Mitnaged. So my daddy was able. It's an interesting question. He spoke Yiddish. With the Polish Jews, he always spoke Yiddish. When he was to the end of his life, and he lived for decades at the United States, he was able to speak basic English. I would speak later. He was central in the translation of Sforim into English. He was a great believer in teaching in English and in Sforim in English. However, he himself regretted, and that's in Nathan, in his child's book, in his son's book, he regretted that he's not able to have a sicha shotefet, a conversation with his grandchildren as he was able if they would have spoken Yiddish. So his grandchildren only spoke English and not Yiddish, and he regretted that he's not able to have a fluent conversation with them.
Who's that?
I think he's his son. It's Reb Shmuel. You speak about Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky. Am I correct? He had a few children. I think he has dozens of his grandchildren all over, networked all over the United States. And again, he didn't come from a rabbinical family. So it's almost all of them are his direct offsprings, the Kamenetskys, and they almost everywhere. So it's very, very possible. I don't have the whole list, but it's very, very possible that it's either his children. Does it make sense to be a grandchild or a child? A grandchild. If he's younger, his children was born in Lithuania in the 20s. It should be a grandchild. It should be a grandchild. Okay, so there is a lot more to speak about, and Bezrat Hashem, we will speak about. We'd only say that his first wife was passed away, as I said, in a young age in 1944. She passed away, and he was remarried in 1958 to a woman, again from Toronto, named Hannah Orman. Okay, so we have a lot more to speak about because we only spoke about his young years. We still have to speak about his role, as I said, as the founder of yeshivot in the United States. It's very important. Im Yirtzeh Hashem, next week.
תגיד גם ששבוע הבא זה שיעור האחרון.
And also, Tina says very much correctly that next week we'd have a shiur, but then on Monday I am going to Miluim. So I guess that for the rest of the summer we are off. I would be here sometimes for a vacation, but because it's difficult for me to prepare the shiurim and know when it would be. Maybe we'd give something that we don't need to prepare for. We'll see. It's hard for me to say that we are just not learning. So we may find a way to have some type of gatherings. I would send a message, of course, when such things would be possible. Thank you so much, and see you, Bezrat Hashem, next week. Hopefully, much more peacefully.
אוקיי.
ביי ביי.
ביי.
תודה רבה. שבוע טוב.
Good to see you. טינה, תגידי שלום לפדריקה.
ביי.
ביי ביי.
כן, כי המצלמה התקלקלה. אני לא מצליח להפעיל את המצלמה. הנה. הנה.
רגע.
עוד פעם נפל.
עוד פעם נפל?
כן, טוב, מה לעשות? בסדר.